Baseball's all-time hits leader is now dead. And you can make an argument, and boy, did Pete Rose start a lot of those, that the hit king was finally kind of killed by baseball itself, which tortured him until the very end. Because a man can only seek forgiveness and tranquility and grace and peace and redemption for so long unsuccessfully before the unrest of his purgatory consumes him and his body and his spirit and even his legendary will is forced to give up. Such an immortal on the diamond, such a mortal off it. Baseball finally buries in its judgmental resting place's garden outside a singular rose. He was 83. The math on that means he spent about as much of his life fighting the sport he loved as playing it, as much time disgracing the field as gracing it. That's a shame. His and ours. We can litigate all the pros and cons of electing a degenerate gambler into a Hall of Fame until each and every one of us is buried right there next to him. But none of those words will change any of the facts about his performance on the field. He had more hits than anyone ever. That will probably live forever. But in the end, a history house for a sport that's all about numbers chose moralities over measurements, chose to forever judge this man instead of honoring him. The last we saw of him in documentary form was the sport still looking down its nose at him and denying his begging. It must have been so humiliating to get the whole of your identity from a single thing and have it rejected by the sacred lords who are most entrusted with honoring it. The only thing those judges ever did more successfully than Rose was judge him. And they think they did it most correctly, but they did it most wrongly, which is a pretty good working definition for sanctimony. What's the point of entrusting judges and arbiters with judgment if all they're going to do with it is abandon common sense to instead clutch with a death grip to rosary beads and the strict definition of a rule? Pete Rose may now rest in peace, but I really don't know how baseball does. We know that all professional sports leagues are full of greedy, hypocritical liars, but this sport fancies itself more sacred than most, even with its storied history of greed, drugs, cheating, and segregation. Pete Rose's crimes, personal addiction, and weakness. Being human, in other words, in a sport in which failing 7 out of every 10 times gets an assortment of others not nearly as good as Rose through its hallowed doors. It could not have been in any way good for Rose's health late in life, always desperately craving to be loved back by the game that spent the last half of his life rejecting and burying him long before his final resting spot. Haunted. He was a living ghost, hawking his signature for money at the seedy Las Vegas fringes of disgrace. He lied and he gambled. Those were his baseball sins. I sit next to a liar every day.
Hey.
I work for a gambling company. I will not judge a human the day after his death for being human. The entire sport is supposed to be about going home, but baseball barred the doors of its most hallowed home and locked one of its favorite sons outside forever until his body went cold as the rest of us. All they had to do at the very end was lift a single forgiving finger of grace. But instead, they'll have us believe that he's the only one here who should feel disgraced.